Hello, my name is Sam Barker, and I am finishing up my final semester for the Master of Education program at King University. This is my recorded defense of my action research project, and the title of my project is The Impact of Teacher Engagement with Students Outside of Class on Their In-Class Performance. Due to recording restraints for the technology that I'm using, I'll have to break this video up into two parts. So for the first part, I'll be going over the first 3 chapters of my paper, the introduction, the literary review, and the methods. And then the remaining parts of my paper will be discussed in a second video. So without further ado, let's get started. The first chapter was on the introduction. And first and foremost, I wanted to talk about why I got the idea to even think about this topic. And it started out with just the large amount of contact I had with young people on a regular basis. My wife and I are both involved with the ministry organization Young Life here in Bristol, Tennessee, and that puts us into contact with a bunch of high school aged students, and we love it. We love being around them. And also, I'm currently in my second year of teaching. I teach at a high school in Carter County, Tennessee school systems, and that obviously puts me in a large amount of contact with young people. And I was really wondering, how can I be a better Young Life leader or a better teacher? So that was my initial kind of thoughts of why I decided to tackle this particular topic. So the statement of my problem, a book that I read in undergrad by Chap Clark talks about how students have felt abandoned. They kind of feel like they're on their own. They feel like the authority figures in their life have kind of let them down, so to speak. But the problem is these students, they have to have adults invested in their lives. One of the quotes that Chap Clark uses in his book that he references someone else saying this is, "It takes a village to raise a child," and that is oh so true. You really have to have multiple people invested in these students' lives. And so I started thinking, how can teachers help in this arena? How can they be more engaged with their students? So that brings me into my locational context where this research was conducted. It was 3 different schools: Hampton High School, Unaka High School, and Vance Middle School. All of these are in Northeast Tennessee, and that is where this research was conducted. And so my research question is as follows. What impact does the teacher have on their students' in-class performance by engaging with them outside of class? The reason I picked this as my research question is because, as I'll get into chapter 2 a little bit more, I had a strong suspicion, and it was supported by previous research, that when a teacher is engaged inside the classroom, when they're in front of their students, that student performance would go up. That just kind of made sense in my head. That was logical. And so I wanted to know if the teachers engaged with their students outside of the classroom, what kind of effect or impact would that have on the students' grades? And so that's the primary research question for this paper. Chapter 2 is my literary review. This is where I dived into the previous research surrounding this topic and began talking about what has previously been done. So first and foremost, like I said, there has been a healthy amount of research done on the engaged teacher inside of the classroom. And the results were kind of what I was thinking. They fell in line with my initial hypothesis that when teachers are engaged inside the classroom, it has very positive outcomes for their students. The students perform better, the grades are higher, and the students learn more. These findings by Cardwell and his colleagues back in 2011 kind of figured out what we were all kind of thinking, that the engaged teacher has better results inside the classroom. But I wanted to know, what about outside of class engagement? What effect does that have on the students? And before we get into that, actual question, what is outside of class engagement uh, effect? What's the effect there? I first want to talk about kind of the previous research and what's been done and what we know so far. So this next little bit we divided up into two different sections: characteristics of the engaged teacher and characteristics of the engaged student, and I kind of see what those have in common. So the engaged teacher, one thing that the engaged teacher has is they have social or street knowledge. They know their students' domains, so to speak. They know where they're coming from. They can speak. They can speak their language. And this was an interesting finding for me because some teachers and administrators may even see it as trivial or almost borderline immature for a teacher to be able to speak to a student at their level using their language, their vernacular. However, this is a very big characteristic that the engaged teacher needs to have. They can't just be kind of so disconnected that they can't speak with this social kind of language. Another characteristic is he or she is personable. The engaged teacher is very personable. They are approachable. They're easy to talk to, and this kind of makes sense. Students have to be able to be comfortable enough with their teachers in order to approach them and be engaged by them. And also, going right off of the personable attribute, the teacher needs to care. They need to care very deeply about their students. This can't just be a care about the academics, a care about the performance level. They need to care even deeper than that. They need to care about the students personally. And when I started looking at all of these different characteristics of the engaged teacher, it kind of got me thinking what they all have in common. All of these have engagement in common. The engaged teacher, they have to engage with the students. They have to be not just locked into the curriculum or to the content knowledge that they're teaching. They have to be engaged with the students themselves, personally, hand in hand with them. So the next thing I want to talk about is what are some attributes of the engaged student? The engaged student needs support from multiple sources. This brings me back to Chap Clark and his book in 2011. Hurt 2.0 is the title of that book. You need to, a student in order to succeed needs to have that support from multiple different sources. They also need to be engaged. Now this kind of has a double meaning here. They need to be engaged themselves. They need to be able to come to class every single day and focus, but they also need to be engaged by or engaged on by the teacher. The teacher needs to kind of activate them, so to speak. So that's a very important characteristic. And they also have to have a desire to learn. Without that desire to learn, the student just disengages. The student just turns off. They're no longer interested what the teacher has to say. They're no longer interested in pushing themselves. And so all these characteristics are part of what makes up the engaged student. And then I also got to think about what do these characteristics have in common? And that made me think that all of these characteristics can be enhanced by an engaged teacher. Excuse me. And so if all of these characteristics help the student become engaged and they can be enhanced by an engaged teacher, then the next question is, how can a teacher start to engage these students? We already know that they can engage them inside the classroom, but what are some other ways that these teachers can engage their students? And so I started talking about outside of class engagements. What are some ways that teachers can get to know their students, have some face time with their students, not in front of the classroom? Sports is an obvious first step there. You can be a coach or even a fan or an encourager. Just letting the students know you saw them play, that they did well, it was awesome to be able to watch them. That helps a lot of that increases that engagement piece. Also, extracurricular activities are another way, clubs, after-school programs. These are just a couple ways that the teacher can engage their students outside of class. Okay, my next chapter is going to be on the methodology that I implemented for my particular action research paper. So first off, the timeline. The start of this paper was way back in January of this year. That's when I was enrolled in the Masters of Education program at King University, and I started thinking about my research questions and possible topics, and so that's where it started. I got approval by the Human Subjects Review Board on October 7th of 2019. And then my data gathering period was from October 21st to November 4th. So now let's get into the actual research design of my action research paper. So informed consent and data collection were gathered via Google survey. This made it very convenient for the participants. No paper, pencil. It was all electronically sent to them via email. Very, very convenient. And so what each participant did after they signed their informed consent form is they thought of 10 students. I asked them to think of 10 different students. 5 of these students that I wanted them to think about were students that they engaged with highly outside of class. 5 of them were students they did not engage with at all outside of class. So that's kind of what they're thinking about. They're thinking of 5 students that they engaged with a lot and 5 students they didn't engage with at all outside of class. They then recorded the current class average for each student. And also something to note, no names were gathered. No student names were gathered whatsoever to preserve confidentiality. They just recorded their class average. And so this gave me 5, I'm going to call them E grades, engaged with grades. And this gave me 5, NE grades, not engaged with grades, for each teacher. So the E grades were averaged and the NE grades were averaged for each participating teacher. This gave each teacher 2 data points, an E average and an NE average. The E averages and the NE averages were ran through an independent groups t-test using Microsoft Excel, determined if there was any significant difference between the averages. And so that was the main research design of my actual paper, trying to see if there's a difference between engaged with outside of class student grades and non-engaged with grades. At the end of the survey, the teachers were thanked and asked to submit. And so at this point, I'm going to stop the video recording, and we'll be picking up on Chapter 4, Gathering and Interpreting Data, in the second video.